This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol lays out his vision on unification with the North, although thin on details about who would foot the bill. Expert analysis on the costs and consequences of reunification. Japanese cabinet ministers risk the ire of Asian wartime foes with a visit to the Yasukuni Shrine on a day that marks 79 years since the end of World War II. Prime Minister Kishida, meantime, swears off war forever. China pledges aid for Myanmar's military government to hold elections amid continuing clashes with ethnic rebels across the country. And an uneven start to the second half of the year for China's economy as factory output slows and home prices slide. But consumption looks to be picking up. Also in East Asia tonight, the fallout of a political feud in the Philippines. Could bad blood between the current and former presidents shape how Manila handles its standoff with China? South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has laid out his vision on unification with the isolated North, even as relations fall to their lowest points in years. Well, he's urged Pyongyang to come to dialogue, proposing a new channel to rekindle exchange.
저는 오늘 남북 당국 간 실무 차원의 대화 협의체 설치를 제안합니다. 여기에서 긴장 완화를 포함해 경제협력, 인적 왕래, 문화 교류, 재난과 기후변화 대응에 이르기까지 어떠한 문제도 다룰 것입니다. 이산가족, 국군포로, 납북자, 억류자 문제와 같은 인도적 현안도 협의할 수 있을 것입니다.
South Korea is celebrating liberation from Japanese colonial rule at the end of World War II. But Mr. Yoon says the liberation is incomplete as long as the two Koreas are divided, and that Seoul is ready to start political and economic cooperation if the North takes just one step towards denuclearization. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul. So, Yoon-suk, first up, how should we read into this reunification vision?
Well, this reunification vision that he laid out today really wasn't a surprise to many South Koreans here because it is something that has been talked about for months here because many feel that there should be some kind of a reunification vision, a new one, because of these difference in the security situation between South and North Korea. And also since North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un earlier this year also said that there would be no reconciliation or reunification with South Korea. Now, in that speech today, he did talk a lot about this, about how he was going to go about with this reunification vision that he put out there. But, earlier he also did say that there was this need for this unification blueprint, considering that the one that South Korea has now was put together in August 1994, and that the security situation has changed much. Now, that one in 1994 was much focused on three principles, and that was seeking independence, peace, and democracy in order to pursue that reconciliation and cooperation between the two Koreas. Now, this new vision that he talks about today is bringing changes within North Korea so that the North Koreans want this reunification and that the North Koreans recognize that unification through freedom is the only way for them to improve their lives. He did also talk about in that speech about launching international conferences to highlight North Korea's human rights issues, setting up a fund to promote global awareness of these issues. And he also said that he was going to support activist groups, those and allow more of the North Koreans to get access to information outside of North Korea. Now, he talked a bit about defectors in that speech, about how South Korea was going to warmly embrace them. He didn't say exactly how he was going to do this, but, there are lots of defectors in China looking for a chance to come into South Korea, because defectors usually cross the border into China first and then make their way to South Korea. But then if they get caught, then, China usually sends them back to North Korea and they end up in North Korean prisons. So if South Korea is trying to attract more defectors to seek this freedom and unification, then South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol might have to put more pressure on China not to send the defectors back. And so, this vision sounds exciting, but there are lots of experts here saying that North Korea isn't going to like what President Yoon is saying today, because what he really is saying that North Korea wants to promote human rights issues, give North Koreans outside information, which are seen as threats to the North Korean regime.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not something that will go down well with Kim Jong-un. Right. Yoon-suk, I just want to shift our attention to Korea-Japan relations now. It appears that there is a growing number of Korean public viewing President Yoon and his aide's policies as pro-Japanese. What exactly is causing that?
Well, first of all, unlike in the past, there was no mention of the historical disputes with Japan in that speech today about the comfort women or forced labor issues, which are still very important to the average South Koreans. Now, he did briefly mention Japan in that speech when he touched on the success of South Korea's economy today, saying that South Korea's per capita income has surpassed Japan for the first time. And that was really it. And so as soon as that speech came out, the main opposition Democratic Party blasted that speech, calling it the speech of the worst ever liberation speech, and saying that he was turning a deaf ear to voices of the South Korean people who are calling Yoon Suk-yeol pro-Japanese. And it's because of things like that that President Yoon is viewed by the opposition and many other South Koreans here as being pro-Japanese. There's also this big controversial going on right now here in South Korea. The ceremony today was really not attended by the political lawmakers from the opposition party, because they didn't like this person that President Yoon named to head this independence museum here, saying that he was also pro-Japanese. And so there's a lot of talk going on about President Yoon being pro-Japanese and that he was just trying to become more friendly with Japan and not tackling the issues that are very sensitive to South Korea.
So even, there is this perception that President Yoon is being pro-Japanese. We've heard what you've said, what the opposition is saying. But what about the Korean public itself? I mean, how are they viewing Yoon's approach towards Japan in this day and time?
Well, yes, I think in general, a lot of the South Koreans here understand that South Korea needs to have better ties with Japan, and they see the reasons why South Korea wants to have the strengthened ties with Japan, the United States, to deter threats from North Korea. But there is a sense out there that South Korea should not forget about the atrocities that Japan did when it was colonizing South Korea. And that's why, even now, there are anti-Japanese rallies in Seoul. In fact, a anti-Japanese rally that's been going on in South Korea every Wednesday since 1992 is still ongoing here in South Korea. And in fact, I went to one on Wednesday and there was a crowd there and they were shouting anti-Japanese sentiments, chanting slogans. And so that sentiment still remains. But having said that, a lot of things have improved here between the two countries, and it seems like a lot of the South Korean, especially the younger people, are taking in and accepting a lot of the culture, the Japanese culture. So let me share the story I did to show you how much has changed between the two Koreas. Hearing Japanese songs sung by a Japanese singer on a Korean TV network would have been unthinkable a few years ago. But that's happening now, and these Japanese singers are winning the hearts of many South Koreans. This show on a major cable network, NBN, features singers from South Korea and Japan. Called Korea-Japan Top 10 Show, it started airing in May after a hit program with a similar theme ended its run earlier this year. So Hae-jin, CEO of Korea Studio, which created both shows, says she took a big risk.
사실은 이게 어떤 역풍을 일으킬 수 있다. 근데 의외로 뭐 되게 우호적으로 받아들이시더라고요. 노래 그 자체로 받아들이셔서 반응이 엄청 좋았죠. 근데 의외로 이제 지금까지는 한 번도 일본 노래가 한국에서 일본어로 된 노래가 나온 적이 없었으니까 그게 좀 센세이셔널했었던 것 같아요.
1, 2, 3.
Japanese singer Utago Koto-ri says she was not aware of the strained ties between the two countries before she came to South Korea for the first time for the program.
最初、出演して歌った時はそういうことは全く考えてなくて、この番組が放送されてそこから韓国の方の言葉で私なんかすごい韓国と日本をなんかこう架け橋になってるんですよ、あなたの歌はっておっしゃってくれたことが責任感というか。
These South Korean singers admit that they were worried as they were not sure how the public would react to them singing Japanese songs on stage. Lin, a popular singer for about 23 years now, says it is important to treat this simply as music and not link it to any other issues.
음악으로 하나 되는 이런 역사적인 순간순간에 저라는 가수가 같이 함께 할 수 있다면 참 좋겠다. 그것 하나 보고 참여하게 된 것 같아요. 언어가 다른데도 불구하고 한국 시청자분들도 굉장히 크게 마음 깊이 받아주셨고 어떤 역사적인 아픈 일들이나 이런 것들은 생각을 크게 안 해주셨다고 생각해요.
It is a very different scene to when South Koreans took the streets in 2019 against Japan's export restrictions on some of South Korea's key industrial materials. Tokyo took that action after South Korea's top court ordered Japanese firms to compensate Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. That issue has not gone away. But South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who took office in 2022, is determined not to let it get in the way of improving ties with his neighbor, as he seeks to solidify security cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington to better cope with North Korea's nuclear threats. Instead of seeking direct compensation from Japanese firms, President Yoon plans to use local funds to compensate the victims. Some experts warn that underlying tensions remain despite the improvement in bilateral ties in recent years.
또는 한일 양국 간의 인적 교류, 물적 교류 이런 것들이 완전히 이제 복원되었다라는 점에서는 좀 높이 평가할 부분이 있어요. 단지 이제 문제는 이런 부분들이 한국에서 우리 국민들이 체감할 수 있는 그런 어떤 가시적인 성과가 별로 나오지 않고 있어요. 과거사 문제에 대해서 완전히 양보했다든지 아니면 후쿠시마 오염수에 대해서 자국민을 보호하는 조치를 전혀 취하지 않았다든지 하는 것들에 대해서는 상당히 문제가 크다.
While the dissatisfaction remains, there's also growing acceptance of Japanese culture. Restaurants and bars like these, opened by South Koreans, are easy to find in Seoul.
확실히 예전에는 노 재팬 하면서 일본 문화 같은 거 약간 배제하자 이런 얘기도 많았던 것 같은데 그런 일본 문화 자체를 조금 더 이렇게 수용해 오는 것들을 보면은 확실히 이제 좀 일본과 한국의 관계가 좀 좋아졌구나 싶은 생각이 드는 것 같아요.
South Korea was liberated in 1945 after 35 years of Japanese colonial rule. And next year, the two countries are expected to elevate their bilateral ties as they celebrate 60 years of diplomatic ties. And yet, there are still lingering anti-Japanese sentiments among South Koreans who say it's crucial for Japan to reaffirm its recognition of historical facts that have strained bilateral ties for decades. So definitely relations between the two sides have improved, but there are lots of South Koreans out there saying that President Yoon has to try and heal the wounds of many South Koreans who are still suffering the pains, from Japan's colonial rule.
Well, thanks so very much for that report. Lim Yun-suk there speaking to us from Seoul. And for more insight on President Yoon's reunification bid and what it possibly means for both North and South Korea, we'll be speaking to an expert from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies a little later on East Asia Tonight. Liberation also being marked across the border in North Korea. Residents began commemorating the end of Japanese colonial rule yesterday. Crowds made their way to Mansu Hill in Pyongyang, laying flowers and bowing before the statues of North Korean founder Kim Il-sung and his son, former leader Kim Jong-il. Japan's anniversary commemoration takes a sensitive turn, with at least 3 cabinet ministers visiting the controversial Yasukuni Shrine in a move that may sour ties with its neighbors. Well, the shrine commemorates Japan's war dead, including high-profile war criminals. China and South Korea regard the place as a symbol of Japan's past aggression and have regularly accused Tokyo of failing to show remorse for wartime atrocities. But the Japanese government says the visits by senior officials were done in their private capacity. Now, at a separate ceremony marking the anniversary of Japan's surrender, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida vowed that his country will never again engage in warfare. It's a promise echoed by Emperor Naruhito.
再び戦争の惨禍が繰り返されぬことを切に願い、戦陣に散り戦火に倒れた人々に対し、全国民とともに心から追悼の意を表し、世界の平和と我が国の一層の発展を祈ります。
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, lofty ambitions from Taiwan, the island aiming to expand its economy to $1 trillion by 2028. And signs of recovery in the global personal computer market, leading Lenovo's latest earnings to beat estimates. Glad to have your company on East Asia Tonight. It is now time for your business news and updates with Roland Lim. And Roland, tell us a little bit more about economic data coming out from China. It's still not painting a picture of broader-based growth?
Not just yet. We have retail sales rising in the month of July in China, but home prices still in the doldrums despite stimulus measures. Now, factory activity also slowed, and that's one of China's key growth drivers. The latest economic indicators continue to show an uneven path towards recovery. Now, China's retail sales grew more than expected in July, signaling consumer spending picked up pace from the month before. The 2 other headline data points, though, missed estimates. Industrial output slowed to its 3rd consecutive month. Fixed asset investments for the first 7 months of the year rose by 3.6%, but that was also lower than expected. The latest snapshot of the world's 2nd biggest economy shows recent government efforts are doing little to boost consumption and to rectify imbalances in China's recovery. And analysts say relief for consumers is unlikely so long as the retail estate slump squeezes household budgets. And the latest new home prices data also didn't provide any relief. Prices in July fell at its fastest pace in 9 years, as supportive policies failed to stabilize the market and to restore confidence in the struggling sector. But the fall did narrow from June's declines. Investment in property development plunged 10.2% in the first 7 months of the year. But China's National Bureau of Statistics says that the economy was, quote, overall stable in July, adding that the switch from old to new growth drivers is causing temporary pains. Beijing earlier vowed to shift focus to consumption, though the broad pledges that have been met with skepticism in the markets. Now, traders brushed off those weak economic indicators, instead holding on to signs of stabilization in China. That's the slowing declines in home prices and better than expected retail sales. Financial and consumer staples led the gainers in Shanghai. It closed up the day 0.94%. Shenzhen doing also about the same, 0.7% up. But in Hong Kong, it did rise on stimulus hopes, but ended the day flat. Also checking in on the RMB, which remains under pressure amid China's battle with deflation. The Chinese currency is currently strong or weaker against the greenback by nearly 0.3%, 7.159 to $1. The People's Bank of China, it didn't conduct any operations on the medium-term lending facility and delayed it to the 26th of August. Now, that's a rare move that comes amid a broad overhaul of its policy toolkit. Latest earnings news, China's e-commerce giant JD.com missed Wall Street estimates for quarterly revenue, hurt by stiff competition and tepid customer spending amid a sluggish economic recovery. The company's total revenue rose 1.2% to $40.7 billion in the second quarter compared to estimates of $40.9, according to 23 analysts polled by LSEG. Now, JD.com shares fell in Hong Kong ahead of the earnings, currently flat in U.S. pre-market trade. A nascent recovery in the global personal computer market, leading China's Lenovo Group's latest results to beat estimates. The world's biggest personal computer maker reporting a 20% jump in first quarter revenue. Now, for the 3 months to June, Lenovo's revenue rose to $15.4 billion, beating a consensus of $14.1 billion. Now, this marks the third straight quarter of sales growth for Lenovo, which has suffered for more than a year of declines in the post-COVID slowdown. Now, net income for the quarter also beat estimates, $243 million. Signs of recovery are emerging in the global personal computer market, with industry data showing a return to growth for the first 3 months of this year. The recovery has partly been spurred by the emerging trend of AI PCs. That's personal computers embedded with specialized chips to run AI software. Lenovo has been among the first to unveil such PCs. Lenovo shares listed in Hong Kong closed about 1% lower. They had risen earlier to nearly 2.4% before the results. Now, Taiwan is targeting an annual economic growth of between 2.8 and 3.6% the next 4 years. And this will raise the overall output of the economy to $1 trillion by 2028 from about $800 billion currently. Now, given the island's dominance in technology, the growth is likely to be driven by robust demand for its exports. According to its National Development Plan, the government plans to boost gross domestic product per capita to around 40,000 by 2028. Now, this will surpass that of neighboring South Korea, which is also one of the world's major tech exporters. Taiwan also aims to stabilize inflation at below 2% and maintain unemployment rates between 3.2 and 3.5%. Now, growth in the self-ruled island has continued to outperform regional rivals, expanding 5.09% on year in the second quarter. And that's due largely to exports of high-tech products, which underpin the development of artificial intelligence. Last month, sales for TSMC, that's a critical supplier to tech clients such as Apple and Nvidia, well, it jumped 45%. The Taiwanese government is expecting the value of AI output to exceed $31 billion by 2026. So market action now. Markets in Japan climbing higher today as the latest GDP figures strengthen the BOJ's case towards normalizing policy. The Nikkei 225 added 0.8%, locking in its fourth straight day of gains. The broader topics also finishing up 0.7%. Meantime, though, the Japanese yen is weaker somewhat against the, well, just flat, 147.32 to the dollar. Investors are focused on further reaction by the decision by Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to bow out of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's leadership election next month. Japan's economy did rebound in the second quarter after shrinking at the start of the year. A strong rise in consumption contributed to the faster-than-expected growth. Now, this strengthens the case for more interest rate hikes from the central bank following its historic exit from an ultra-loose monetary policy. Second quarter preliminary figures show the economy expanded at an annualized 3.1%, beating forecasts. Authorities say private consumption increased for the first time in 5 quarters, and that's spurred by pay hikes workers received from the spring wage negotiations, boosting household income and spending. Still, the Japanese yen's recent strength and signs of a slowdown in the U.S. economy presents risks to the export-reliant Japanese economy. Plus, traders are closely watching whether the Bank of Japan will raise rates again. Now, last month, if you remember, it hiked borrowing costs to its highest in 15 years and signaled a chance for another such move. Now, policymakers have said they expect consumption to rebound as wage hikes filter through the economy. But a recent market meltdown sparked by the unwinding of the so-called yen carry trades threatens to complicate the BOJ's policy path. And that is the latest in business, Oteli.
Thanks very much for that report, Roland. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea's president lays out his vision on unification with the North, seen by most as a pipe dream. Well, we'll explore his rationale with an expert. And North Korea all set to welcome foreign tourists after shutting its borders for 4 years due to COVID. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol makes a fresh proposal to North Korea for more dialogue and cooperation, but only if Pyongyang decides to denuclearize. Japan marks 79 years since the end of World War II. At least 3 cabinet ministers visit the Yasukuni Shrine, honoring the war dead, a move that may sour ties with its neighbors. And China pledges aid for Myanmar's military government to hold elections amid continuing clashes with ethnic rebels across the country. China is promising aid and technical assistance for Myanmar's military to help the country hold an election. Well, this announcement comes as top diplomat Wang Yi visits the capital, Naypyidaw, highlighting Beijing's willingness to back the ruling military and step up mediation efforts. Myanmar's military government has been facing mounting pressure from an armed rebellion that has been swiftly gaining ground. Well, according to the state-run paper, Global New Light of Myanmar, the two sides held discussions around an all-inclusive election where technological assistance will be given for the census-taking process and aid provided for the running of the election. China's foreign ministry has yet to comment on the matter. Just last month, the ruling military extended a state of emergency in Myanmar for another 6 months. This, it said, was to allow more time for census data to be gathered for voter lists. But questions surrounding the legitimacy of the election remain, with most Western nations unlikely to recognize the result. Wang Yi's visit to Myanmar comes amid growing concern that an upsurge in fighting in border regions could spill over into China. Ongoing clashes since last year between armed ethnic groups and the army have resulted in the ruling military suffering a series of losses. And this includes the fall of border town Lashio in northern Shan state, which sits on a key highway to China's Yunnan province. Here's a recap of our top story. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol made a fresh proposal to North Korea for more dialogue and cooperation, but that's only if Pyongyang decides to denuclearize. During a speech marking Liberation Day, Mr. Yoon suggested setting up a new inter-Korean working group to handle issues ranging from economic cooperation to reunions of families separated by the Korean War. While Seoul's call for a unified Korea comes at a low point in relations, with tit-for-tat propaganda campaigns and intensified military drills. And for more insights, let's speak with Gordon Kang. He's a senior analyst at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University. Well, good to have you on board again, Gordon. So help us understand, first up, President Yoon's reunification vision, right? I mean, it seems like a tough sell, especially with the young people in Seoul. So what exactly is the rationale behind it?
Right. Well, I think for South Korea, reunification remains fundamentally an important part of its national policy for several reasons. I think it's clear that be it a progressive or conservative government, from a legal perspective, they cannot arbitrarily do away with its mandate because reunification is codified in the constitution. But more importantly, I think reunification presents a moral and humanitarian responsibility in alignment with South Korea's commitment to its democratic principles. And thus, we see in President Yoon's speech a significant emphasis on the concept of freedom as part of a freedom-based unification. So this is likewise as well a strategic choice because it positions South Korea more clearly as a leader in this domain and as a global pivotal state. In addition, the idea that it represents a pivotal moment for future opportunities for the nation remains as well a clear aspect of President Yoon's speech.
Right. And Gordon, do you think things could possibly shift or change with the U.S. presidential election? I mean, say, for instance, if Donald Trump wins, could he meet Kim Jong-un again and somehow revive talks with the two Koreas?
Right. I think in the event of a Trump administration, I think these developments could pose, the developments introduced in President Yoon's speech could pose as a constructive first step. However, I think in such a scenario of the Trump administration, it would be difficult to ascertain whether or not its results will be more substantially constructive as with the first Trump administration. As again, there are fundamental gaps to be bridged, right? And this applies as well to the inter-Korean working group that President Yoon proposed. For example, with the issue of denuclearization, it has become a structural aspect of North Korea's security and deterrence, but it also serves as political justification for the social and economic sacrifices, for example, that the people has contributed to for decades. Secondly, I think regime survival, and perhaps more importantly as a reason, regime survival, because access and exposure to information and opportunities for a drastic increase in living standards for the North Korean people, for social egalitarianism and so on, poses risks to the way that North Korea governs itself and structured itself since Kim Il-sung's era. So I think there are fundamental gaps that needs to be bridged. And it is unlikely that even in the event of a Trump administration, it could smoothen itself very quickly.
Right. Do we even know what is the estimated economic cost of reunification, and how would it be shared if this reunification, a united Korea, ever become a reality?
I think this is this issue of how reunification can come about systemically and institutionally has been long debated, for several decades now. And this cost, remains difficult to ascertain, but for sure it's getting bigger and bigger as the decades roll by. But I think fundamentally, the issue remains political, because at the end of the day, each Korea faces different national interests, and how these political gaps are bridged would then pave the way for how economic opportunities can be resolved, etc. And I think strategic, but it's not to say that it cannot happen, because strategic logic has remained consistent across how North Korea approaches its inter-Korean relations. For example, past inter-Korean negotiations could be quite capricious, could be quite uncompromising and ambiguous in some areas, but significant progress and key milestone agreements such as the North-South Joint Communique of 1972 and the 1991 Basic Agreement occurred not long after significant geopolitical changes that helped align for these agreements to happen, such as being the détente in U.S.-China relations and the collapse of the Soviet Union, respectively. So ultimately, I think
Gordon, I'm not sure if this is too much of a stretch right here, but can we draw any parallels, with the case of East-West Germany that could be applied to Korea?
I think that would be difficult because it will be difficult to say, because I think these are two different contexts, and the lessons learned from one may not really apply closely to the other. At the end of the day, when we deal with North Korea, we have to realize that the system is fundamentally different from what many nations are used to working with or are used to dealing with. And for both Koreas, this has long been an internal affair between the two Koreas, even though President Yoon in his speech recognized that and acknowledged that this, for any reunification policy to be successful, it needs to have to support an alignment with the international community. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a highly nationalistic affair for has been a highly nationalistic affair for both nations, and I think it would be difficult to picture.
So Gordon. So it's. I mean, they share somewhat of the same language, some of the cultural commonalities. We see that, but the economic and the political divide seems like it's simply too vast. To make this united Korea a reality. So, in other words, just can't North and South Korea just coexist as separate nations?
Yes. So I think. I mean, yes, and I think it's difficult that I think for what we see now is actually significant changes in how both Koreas view the ideal of reunification and the ideal of whether or not this question of existing as two separate states. For North Korea, since the start of the year, they have begun the process of deinstitutionalizing reunification as a national policy, predicated on their perception of current security dynamics in the Korean Peninsula, regarding US and South Korean actions. And this suggests a commitment to mitigating the significance of North Korea's, or rather distinguishing North Korea's nationhood from the legitimacy that reunification has long symbolized for both Koreas. So I think I think these changes may signal a different course being set forward for future North Korean generations' understanding of nationalism. So perhaps we will see in time to come, we may see in time to come, this ideal of reunification being molded differently by either Koreas.
Right. Thank you very much for speaking with us yet again, Gordon Kang, S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University. Meantime, North Korea will reopen its borders to international tourists at the end of the year after a 4-year hiatus due to strict COVID controls. Two specialized tour operators say that they have received confirmation that tourism to Samjeon and potentially the rest of the country will resume in December. Samjeon is near North Korea's mountainous northern border with China, and it's also a gateway city to Mount Paektu, the official birthplace of the late Supreme Leader Kim Jong-il. His son and successor Kim Jong-un has poured huge resources into developing the area, building apartments, hotels, and a ski resort. International flights in and out of North Korea restarted only last year, allowing stranded nationals to return home. And in February, a small group of Russian tourists flew over for a private tour. But one firm warns that the early days of the tourism restart may be a little more chaotic than usual. Before the pandemic, tour companies say around 5,000 Western tourists visited each year. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Typhoon Ul set to skirt the Tokyo region today, cancelling hundreds of flights and train services. And no megaquake for now. Japan lifts its warning as seismic activity in the Nankai Trough returns to normal. Typhoon Ul's approach towards Japan has prompted airlines to cancel hundreds of flights. Rail services along some of the busiest parts of Japan's bullet train network will be affected as well. According to the Japan Meteorological Agency, the storm is barreling northwards towards the capital, Tokyo, packing wind gusts of up to 180 kilometers per hour. It's forecast to further strengthen before curling northeast into the Pacific. Now, while the storm is not likely to make landfall, it could dump up to 200 millimeters of rain onto Tokyo and its surrounding regions by Saturday morning. All Nippon Airways, meantime, has cancelled some 280 domestic flights scheduled for Friday, while Japan Airlines has scrapped more than 190 domestic and 24 international services. Also on Friday, parts of Japan's bullet train network will face suspensions, including the busy bullet train route between Tokyo and Nagoya. Tens of thousands of passengers are expected to be hit by travel disruptions. Well, Ul is the 7th typhoon of the year. It comes just days after Storm Maria hit northern Japan with record rain over the holiday weekend. Well, that deluge affected Iwate Prefecture the most, prompting officials to activate their top emergency warning. In just one day, the storm dumped nearly 370 millimeters of rain on Kuji City. Well, that's double the average monthly rainfall it typically receives in August. Staying in Japan, authorities have ended a week-old megaquake warning as seismic activity in the previously at-risk Nankai Trough area has stabilized. Authorities issued the warning last week after a magnitude 7.1 quake struck off the southwestern island of Kyushu. That tremor did not cause major damage, but did leave fears of a possible magnitude 9 megaquake. A smaller quake hit eastern Japan days later, but its epicenter was outside of the Nankai Trough zone. The megaquake warning severely disrupted travel plans during Japan's Obon holiday period and triggered panic buying of essential supplies. A Nankai Trough megaquake, however, is still predicted to have a 70 to 80% chance of striking in the next 30 years. A political alliance between two powerful families in the Philippines is heating up ahead of midterm elections next year. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, who is seen as pro-China, have been in a war of words as tensions run high in the South China Sea. Now, could this domestic quarrel shape how Manila handles its maritime standoff with Beijing? Well, CNA's current affairs show Insight went to the Philippine coast to find out.
Here, in Zambales, Philippines, Efren Purones has made his living from the seas for the last 5 decades.
Doon na papuntang Scarborough. 260 degree. Doon sureball ang tira mo doon. Doon kahit nakapundo ka, sigurado may dadawi. Dito paanod-anod na nga. Wala man.
There's a reason Efren no longer ventures into the waters of the Scarborough shore, some 200 kilometers away, despite the promise of a bountiful catch.
Ito, nagwawater cannon yan eh. Pinagtulungan nila yung dalawa silang barko, pinagtulungan nila yan ay yan ang namigay ng diesel. Yang bipar na yan. Ayun, Chinese Coast Guard ang laki. Oo, yan dalawa. Nahirapan kami ngayon hindi kami makapasok ng Scarborough talaga sa mismong looban ng Scarborough.
The main strategy by which China attempts to deny us access to our waters in the South China Sea is by maintaining a presence there in order to physically block but also deter fishing efforts and offshore oil and gas survey efforts by the Philippines.
In the last year and a half, clashes between the vessels of these two nations have become more frequent in these waters, culminating in perhaps the tensest confrontation yet. On June 17, Chinese sailors, armed with knives and sticks, clashed with Filipino personnel.
And it started because President Marcos Jr. started to pivot away from the non-confrontational policy of Duterte. China also ramped up its response, and increasingly those responses have become more and more violent, culminating in this unfortunate incident in which a Philippine Coast Guard officer had his thumb cut off. This is the first time in many years that there has been physical injury that arose from the clash.
In the backdrop of the conflict between China and the Philippines, there is another feud brewing. A quarrel that could shape how Manila deals with its standoff with Beijing. Bad blood is bubbling between the Philippines president, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., and his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. Early signs of a rift could be seen when Marcos Jr. deviated from Duterte's approach to China.
So the Duterte administration was famous in its foreign policy for accommodating China most of the time. There was an expectation during the elections that Marcos Jr. is, as the anointed successor of President Duterte, that Marcos Jr. is going to continue the foreign policy of Duterte. But that did not happen.
Ang West Philippine Sea ay hindi katang-isip natin lamang. Ito ay atin.
What we saw instead is that Marcos Jr. pursued a harder foreign policy, which meant that Marcos Jr. was more assertive in defending the Philippines' rightful maritime claims in the West Philippine Sea.
Yet, Rodrigo Duterte, who was president from 2016 to 2022, was not always so accommodating with Beijing. While he was campaigning for the presidency, Duterte promised to stake the Filipino claim on the disputed atolls.
Kahit na nagsimula siya sa kanyang campaign noong 2015, nasabi niya sasakay siya ng jet ski at ilalagay niya yung bandera ng Pilipinas doon sa mga artificial islands ng China. Mukhang isang lang yung campaign peg.
Kaya binoto namin, kay sinabi niya, yung Scarborough, mag-jet ski pa ako, di ba sinabi niya? Sinabi niya, ayusin niya yung gusto diyan sa Scarborough. Kaya yung ang dami namin bumoto sa kanya.
But after coming to power, President Duterte would switch tact, going so far as setting aside a 2016 Hague Tribunal arbitration decision that China's claims had no legal foundation pursuant to UNCLOS. China has rejected the Hague ruling.
Na half-jokingly, ang sabi niya ay, ano bang masama kung tayo maging probinsya ng China? Half-jokingly, galing yung kay Digong. At sabi ni Digong, nung nanalo tayo sa UNCLOS noong 2016, ay isang pirasong papel lang yan na dapat itapon sa basura.
So, yung ano talaga niya, no, yung kanyang talagang focus is independent foreign policy. No? So sabi niya na yung kanyang usual term na friends to all, enemies to none, yeah, there is this decision by the tribunal, pero who will implement it? No? So sabi niya, no, if we cannot do this na the tried conflict situation, why not befriending China in the hope that they will have they will also respond. No?
When Duterte's term was up, his camp would form an alliance with the Marcoses in the 2022 presidential election. Rodrigo Duterte's daughter, Sara Duterte, ran to be Ferdinand Marcos's vice president. Dubbed the Uni Team, the Marcos-Duterte tandem won in a landslide. But soon after his inauguration, President Marcos Jr. took a different path from his predecessor. Duterte would come out against his successor's actions. In an interview with Chinese state media, the former president implied that Marcos Jr. was an American stooge, that it is the Americans that will tell him what he should say to China.
Marcos has practically outsourced our defense and foreign policies to the United States. And at the same time, we have a former president that is using the closeness of Marcos to the United States in order to discredit him. Not because of national interest, but because of dynastic interest.
But as far as the fishermen are concerned, they prefer Marcos's more muscular approach.
Ganito katagal lang sa Scarborough, marami nang nakuha. Ilang oras to? Dito, sa tabi. Si Marcos talaga ko sa Pilipino. Si Duterte kampi sa China, kaya doon ako na walang gana. Kahit kababayan ko yun, wala na akong gana.
Well, if you want to follow up on that story, you can catch the full Insight episode tonight at 9 p.m. Singapore time on CNA. And as always, you can also catch it on YouTube and MeWatch. And in news just in, Thailand's Puatai Party has chosen 37-year-old Paetongtarn Shinawatra, the daughter of billionaire ex-Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, as its candidate for Prime Minister. It follows the dismissal yesterday by a court of Setatawisin from the post. And you can catch the full story and other leading news on Asia tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that does it for East Asia tonight, this Thursday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And of course, you can always find us on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.